Hey listeners, Bookish Flights has been nominated for the Women in Podcasting Awards in the Authors and Books category. If you could head over to www.womenpodcasters.com/vote and vote for Bookish Flights in the Author and Books category, I would greatly appreciate it. Your vote would go a long way in helping the podcast gain visibility and spread our love for books and reading. Head to the show notes to get a direct link to vote. Thank you. Hi, I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Eli Gardner. Eli is an award-winning author of 7 books. She is a military veteran with over a dozen deployments to the Middle East, and this time spent overseas, and the beauty she finds in misunderstood places and topics inspires much of her writing. She writes in the genres of historical fiction, fairy tale retellings, cozy magical realism, comedy, and poetry. She has a budding horse rescue with 7 saved in the last 2 years from kill pens, and names all the horses after authors. Book profits fund rescue operations, as well as 25% being donated to a rotating list of mostly veteran-related 501c3s. Welcome to the show, Eli.
Thank you. I'm so excited to get to chat with you.
Yes, we've had some correspondence along the way, listeners. Eli was featured on our Story Share episode that I did with Jackie Just Chatters. So if you want to check that out, there was a submission about one of her poetry books. And ever since hearing about it, I'm like, oh, I have to talk to her. And I'm so glad we have her on the show today.
That was so awesome. That made me cry. That's sweet testimony to the girl Jessica. She was talking about one of the poems because she was a veteran too, and how it affected her and affected some of her PTSD. And like to get that feedback as an author is just it. That's why we keep writing. So thank you for hosting that.
Absolutely. And I have to imagine, right? It's like if we just impact one person, then I feel like my message, or in your case, your writing, that is all that mattered, was just to impact one person in such a profound way.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, so we have a great little bio about you, but I actually feel like we're so much more than our bio. So tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yes. So you definitely hit the key points, but I'm 35 now, and about 3 years ago, I stepped away from the military and military contracting, and that had been my job specifically, was to deploy. So I did that a whole bunch of times, and I just felt like it was the perfect time to step away. And now I'm just kind of still going through that transition. I'm sure, like from a military family, it can be kind of hard. So I'm still like finding my place, but I stepped away to focus on writing and just set down roots for once and stop traveling all over the place. And it's given me the ability to make a little community and start focusing on rescuing horses as well. So that's been fantastic.
I imagine that having a job where you deploy so much, it almost like I feel like this life is like kind of like a hamster wheel. Like you just get back on it and then you do it again and then you drop back off and you get back on. And I imagine for your sake, having done so many deployments, that had to feel like that and just gets old after a while.
Yeah, you can only do so many, that's for sure. And it was, I enjoyed a lot of aspects of the job, but it comes at the expense of a regular life and that community. So, I mean, I like to make this statement where I'm 35 and like I'm just learning how to cook chicken because like I just didn't know how to do those normal things because I was gone all the time. So that's where I am.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that because we had just had chicken for dinner. And that is the one thing on the grill that I have not mastered myself either. So I'm like,
The next thing, girl.
it's like I'll wait till my husband gets home and be like, you have to grill the chicken. Like I can do burgers, I can do steak. It's just chicken is like a really fickle thing.
But you got the steak. Good for you.
Yeah. So, well, that's only because I'm like, okay, 4 minutes each side. Like he'll give me my little talk of what I need to do. I suppose I could Google it, but he's like my Google, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah, it's a team effort.
Well, the other part of it too is I know you're kind of mentioning forming a community, and I think that's something that's so unique to military life in a way, right? Is we don't always have a local community, but we have a community of these people we've met along the way. And I feel like, especially for
Yes.
your sake, having done deployments with them, I imagine you get incredibly close when you're doing that together.
Yeah, and that's a very insightful observation because, we did always go with the same team, but in the States, we all lived in separate places. So you're putting all this time into all these friendships. And then like, for families, sometimes like you get uprooted every couple of years. Or like for me, it was, every 3 months I had a whole bunch of friends while I was downrange. And then, I was home like quote home, but I had no connections. So,
Yeah.
and it was very interesting. And it's been like super refreshing just to make a normal community.
Yeah. It's something that I kind of like dream about a little bit in my mind, right? Of like, what's going to
Yes.
happen when we're done moving? It scares me because I'm like, what if we don't like where we're living? What if we, and then we want to move again? And you're like, well, it's not as easy because it's not on the horizon of, yep, you'll move in 2 years or 3 years, but of
Mm.
what it could look like to have these like long-term friendships when you stay in a location for a longer period of
It'll
time
be
than a
beautiful.
short stint.
You'll love
So, are you from San Diego?
it. Yes. My family's been here for quite a while. They've been here
Okay.
probably 15 to 20 years. And, I traveled and was stationed here and there, but most of my family's still here. So I came back to be near them.
Yeah. And that's always what you think about too, right? Is like what's going to make the most sense when you are done moving? Like,
Mhm.
where's that community going to be? Well, let's switch gears a little. Actually, I don't want to switch gears too much yet because I want to hear about your horse rescue before we talk about your writing life. Because I follow her Instagram account, listeners, and you guys all should too, because you'll see pictures of her beautiful horses. And tell us about this because I'm very intrigued.
They're so fabulous. I was saving for years. I don't know how many people you'll ever meet that said like I'm specifically saving to rescue all these broken horses, but that's what I did, and it's a good thing because it is an expensive thing to do. But um, since I, walked away from the military stuff, it was kind of a fast and furious whirlwind of like publishing 7 books in these last, 2.5 years, but also rescuing 7 horses. So the numbers seem to like correspond accidentally, but they all came from the kill pen, which is where people like to kind of offload their horses when they, can't take care of them anymore, or they're sick, or they can't afford them, or they're just broken and they can't be ridden. So they don't have a very good fate when they go in there. So people
Yeah.
like me and different rescues will, raise the money and pull them out. And I pulled my first 4 and thought I was just going to foster them, but that was a big, hilarious joke. So they're my children now, and I thought it would be fun to just give them all author names so that we could have our little writers meetings. And yeah, it's been great.
Our writers' meetings. I love that. You could use that either way, right? Like WRITER or RIDER.
Oh, you're so clever, girl.
Oh, well, had you always been into horses? Was that a thing as a child you did?
Yeah, I was a
Okay.
little horse girl, but I only did writing. I took lessons for maybe 1 year and then I kind of, grew up and set it aside and didn't really have time or any of that. And I heard somewhere that your 30s is all about like rediscovering the things that you loved as a child, but kind of like unapologetically. And now we have like the time and money to do it. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. And the horses, they just have such a special spirit. And for me too, kind of stepping away from the job that I had, I was just looking for like quiet and like peace.
Yeah.
And I was definitely overstimulated like very easily. I still definitely am, noises, all those things that horses like also don't like. So
Yeah.
it was just a really good match when I reconnected with them. And then I was like, I have to pay this forward, this kind of peace and connection that I'm getting from them. So then I kind of, honed in on the horse rescue, and eventually I want to make it a retreat space for, veterans and other people who are just kind of tired and need some peace.
Yeah. My husband will send me, he'll find like on Instagram, like even these community building, like be like, military members locally in this area want to meet for a hike, and just these people that create these little
Yes.
micro communities. It's
Hmm.
incredible what people come up with and how they do it. It
Yes.
always amazes me.
I love seeing it. There's definitely a lot of things popping up for like in the adventure realm, kind of for veterans and nonprofits, and lots of activities and outdoor stuff. And yeah, I want to be one of those people that provides that opportunity.
Well, I can't wait to see what you do. You'll have to keep me posted along your journey
Yes.
here.
Yes.
Um, I love what you said too about being in your 30s and rediscovering what you've done as a kid, because I actually feel like that's kind of what I did with books, right? And this
Yes.
podcast on books. I'm a physical therapist by trade, but back to the
Mm.
hamster wheel, I was just tired of moving my license every time we move and then getting a job and getting doctor, like meeting the
Oh, yeah.
doctors locally, finally getting referrals, and then we're moving again. And I was like, I'm over that. I'm over the hamster race of that.
Yes. And they definitely they make you feel like you can't make a living off those things, right? When we were kids and growing up, and I don't know, maybe rightly so at the time, but yes, we're coming back to those things and realizing like, oh, well, you can make a living on
Yeah.
those things, on loving books or like loving horses. You just have to be very creative, and at the very least, it fulfills our soul. So that's very important too.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say is I think there's a balance, right? Of okay, we what do we need to live, but what do we need to do to fill our soul at the same time?
Mm.
I've heard people ask like would you rather have a job where you made all the money, but then it like just sucked your soul out every day, or would you
Oh,
rather live
yes.
comfortably and like be able to feed your soul at the same time? And it's like I know what I would choose right away. Might not be the
Absolutely.
same for all, but
I'm with you. I'm with you.
so, well, let's switch gears a little bit because now I feel like you're kind of, did you always want to be a writer? Was that something from childhood?
It was. So there's been
Okay.
like three things that have been consistent my whole entire life. One was writing. So ever since I was in the first grade, like I think that's when they teach you to write, but like that's when I wrote my first little books, and I still have all of them. And my parents like to show me them. And of course they were trash, but they were like, oh, we love them. And the books were about horses always.
Okay.
And like none of these things, like the horses were not in my family, right? Like we didn't have a farm or any of that, but always writing. And I wrote like my first full length novel, if you will, in sixth grade. And then like every other year I would write another one. And, of course, none of them were very good. And a lot of them sounded a lot like Lord of the Rings and then Twilight and then whatever I was reading at the time. But, that's how you learn.
Yep.
And yeah, I've just never been able to not write. So it was those things, the horses, the writing, and the Middle East. I had this really weird obsession with the Middle East. And when I was in the first grade, I would say that I wanted to be an Egyptologist. And I don't even know where I like heard that word. I'm not Middle Eastern. And yeah, so I grew up and all of these things kind of like came to play very important roles in my life. So it's very interesting.
I think that's something though, as children, I think we do get intrigued by places. I remember being super intrigued by Egypt, right? And it became like in my mind this bucket list place that I thought, oh, I'm going to make it to Egypt one day. I've yet to make it. I'm still haven't been there, but
That's
it's,
interesting. And you
and
have to go.
yeah, like it just was something, just the history and all I loved. And I think you attach to it. And then as a kid, you're like, you want to learn all you can about it, right?
Yes, it becomes your identity.
Yeah. So that my other one was New Zealand, which we did hit that one. We were living in Hawaii when we got married. And so it was like, I was like, I've always
Ooh,
wanted to go to New Zealand. And where do you honeymoon when you live in Hawaii? I was like, well, I'll wait to go to New Zealand until we have like vacation time and money.
yes.
So
Good call.
was able to check that one off, but Egypt will have to wait, I think. So
You got to get there though. It's
yeah.
worth it.
Okay. So with your, I'm imagining this pace of life you were living with all these deployments back to back, you're going out. Were you able to write in that time period of your life?
I was actually. I wrote probably a decent amount, but definitely not as much as I've written in the past couple years. I wrote a couple books, I'd say, over a period of like 12, 13 years. And
Okay.
obviously, since I left that behind me, I've just been like churning them out. But I would always have my notebooks with me, and downrange, like half of my suitcase, my duffel bag would be the notebooks. And we would work our shift, like our 12-hour shift. But like if there was a break time, I'd like go out to the bunker, which was the only quiet place I could ever find, and just like shut everyone out and like scribble my writing. And it's just that was who I was, and everybody knew. They're like, oh, there she goes again, writing her stories.
Yeah. So what were you writing? So you have obviously a wide range of genres that you have written here. What has been your favorite one to write? Or do you have any?
Who, yeah, I love writing in different genres actually. Poetry is like a newfound love that I just kind of discovered a couple years ago. But I think my favorite is the one that's like A Thousand Nights. That's my story, and Rapunzel Must Die. They're novels, and they're half fairy tale retellings, and half historical fiction, but recent historical fiction set in like the early 2000s. So I really like those because I get to write kind of lyrically and descriptively. I just like making things beautiful. So I think that's my favorite genre.
Yeah. And I imagine as a writer, you have to love words and language, right? And I could see where this just melds into who you are as a writer.
Yes, words are very interesting. I wouldn't say that I have a big vocabulary, which is like, when people they're like, "Oh, you write poetry." Like poetry is not really my thing. It's kind of like, fancy with like obscure meanings, and I'm like, that is so not my poetry. I use short words. Big big concepts is what I like to say, small words. And it's just, but still it's fun for me to craft them in a very beautiful way.
Yeah. You had me at historical fiction. That's my go-to.
I love historical fiction, especially when like they weave in little elements of whimsy or magical realism, because it's just what better way to learn something. I really am a big believer on like spending my time learning things, like even in my entertainment. So I almost feel cheated if it's like not based around some kind of historical aspect or like they're teaching me something, but I just want you to trick me and like, put some magic in there too, so I don't feel like I'm reading a textbook.
Totally agree. I feel like we've had this conversation multiple times on the show about how we wish we learned history like that as kids, right?
Oh,
Like
that
what a
would be
disservice we're doing
fantastic.
just that rote memorization in textbooks.
Yes, I love that. That would have been great.
Yeah, because back to like being intrigued by something. I mean, who's intrigued by like a stat and a date? You're like, okay, well, that means nothing to me unless you're
Yes.
like hooked into this story of like, well, yeah, I want to know what's going to happen. Tell me more. And so
Yes,
it
that's very true. And to like follow characters too, like from whatever culture you're learning about and make you feel invested. That's the best way to learn and, get empathy for a different type of people or something. So
yes.
I agree.
Yeah, I always say like walking in someone else's shoes. If I'm not learning something, right, like quote unquote historical, I love to learn about someone else's life, a life that I will never live, a life that I will never have. And
Mhm.
exactly to your point of like falling in love with a character and then following them through the story is
Yes, it's
fantastic.
fascinating. And it's a good time to be able to peek into like other people's lives with all the crazy, technology and internet. It's very easy to disappear down a rabbit hole learning about all these other people.
Yeah, as an author, when you're writing out characters and you're doing that, right? Like you're kind of doing this character arc, this deep dive into the characters, is that as intriguing of a process?
It is. It is intriguing. And they usually end up being, a compilation of multiple different people, either and personalities that, we as authors have experienced. And then you're adding in the different details that you've gleaned from either like observation or your real personal experience or like reading. For me, when I do research, even though I had been to Afghanistan a whole bunch of times, I still just consumed all these, videos and movies and books from their perspective, and it was extremely fascinating.
I love that. And then you have the ability to then take that and put that into words that we can read. So thank you for that.
Yes. My pleasure.
So, well, what have you learned about yourself through writing?
That is such a fabulous question. I have learned that everything that I have experienced, and mostly the heavy stuff that could be seen as negative, is for a reason. And writing is just like the tool that makes it so obvious to me. Because when I take something that I've experienced and I can craft it in that way. And that's my whole thing, right? I like to write about heavy things or ugly topics that people don't want to really touch or learn about necessarily, but make it something beautiful so that they can.
Yeah.
Um, then when I've taken the pain or whatever, all the feelings, and I see this beautiful story come out of it, I'm like, well, this was very obviously, I was supposed to experience what I did because here's this beautiful story. Now it's in the hands of people, and these people are coming back to me and they're saying, this book is like my favorite book ever, or this poem changed my life. And then again, I can see, so clearly that everything happened for a reason to me. And, writing has given me that gift and lesson. And it's, the biggest of lessons.
Yeah. And I think there's such healing that can come when we can finally see the purpose to our pain, right? And
Yes.
we can categorize that. And again, it doesn't mean would have wanted to go through these things, but when there's a purpose behind it and you can finally see it on the other end, such healing can come from that.
It's the best moment. It's the best realization. And if I can like play any part in how I'm telling a story or how I'm expressing something to get another person to get to that point, then it's just such an amazing feeling. And that what you're describing is interesting actually, because I just wrote a poem and posted it just a couple of days ago about like, I can't wait for the day when God kind of lifts the veil and is like, this is why I did this here, and this is why I hurt you here, because you needed to love like this here. And that is the most beautiful thing, is to see all those connected dots in hindsight. So I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah, I just got the chills as you were saying that because it's so true, right? There's
Hmm.
when we start going through this tough thing, it's like I feel like I'm always like kicking and screaming, like, no, 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 I don't want to go there, I don't want to go there. But like, of course, you have to. So you're like, okay, but we're
Me
never going to
too.
understand on this side why we had to do it. I mean, we might have a glimmer, but we're not
Yes.
going to fully understand that story. But and I
Yes, we have
feel
a
like
glimmer if we're lucky.
yeah, exactly. I mean, you might not even have that, right?
Yes. Yes.
Um, and I think what you're saying is you're trying to make these things accessible for people through your
Yeah,
writing.
thank you. That's a very good way to sum it up, a much better way.
No, I just was thinking that as you were talking, I'm like, you are making tough topics accessible so us who haven't experienced that can go through it and understand it and provide empathy back to that, right? Of have more empathy in the situation.
Yeah, and also accessible like to their own feelings kind of, because I wrote like, especially the poetry, I just wrote it from my own experiences, but I knew a lot of people would relate to it, so I just
Yeah.
put out all the ugly stuff that wasn't very flattering even. And then I'll have people say like, this made me think about my PTSD or whatever, or my time in Afghanistan, like in a totally different lens. I never even viewed it that way, and it was like, oh, my words and the way that I strung them together was able to change somebody's like whole mindset. That's freaking incredible.
Yeah. And I think our brain will do that out of a protective response, right? Is it will like
Yes.
compartmentalize this dark thing in there. And so then you don't really touch it, but it's
Yeah.
always there. It's always lingering. So what a gift that you can give them through your writing to look at that, finally take a look at that closed door and be like, okay, what is here?
Yes, and I do that with like a really big sense of responsibility. I don't do it and leave them in that state. If
Yeah.
I'm going to crack open a heavy topic, I'm always going to dilute it with some like, the war poetry is a great example. I put in some funny ones, like some hilarious ones about, getting a rocket attack while you're stuck in a latrine and it's 120 degrees and your pants are around your ankles. Like, I'm gonna make you cry on one page and then make you laugh on another page. And I always think about the reader and like protecting, their experience as they give these topics a chance.
Yeah. It's so interesting you say that because as my role of my when I was practicing as a physical therapist, I guess I still am.
Mhm.
But I'm a women's health physical therapist. So there were certain things or,
Mm.
treatments that we would do. And it was always like this could open up potential trauma, like past trauma for people.
Oh,
And so
yes.
make sure they have someone, right? Like that's not my qualification as a physical therapist, but if you're going to go down that road, like make sure they have someone supporting them on the other end. And that's
Oh,
it's exactly kind of what you're saying is just making
yes.
sure that they're like
That's
it's
very interesting.
we're
And
gonna
that's very important. That's a very important role. I'm sure they all appreciated that because nobody wants to be kind of caught off guard with those feelings or whatever, because then they might not explore it because they're not feeling safe if you just kind of just surprise. You're in
Yeah.
this compromising position or, story. So that's a
Yeah.
very important thing you did.
Yeah, there's a really interesting book called The Body Keeps the Score. Have you read this or heard of it?
I have heard of it. It is on my list because I am also fascinated by this topic.
Yeah, so I mean, but it talks about how we store that trauma in our body. And that's kind of what, as PT, sometimes we could be pushing into a little bit, right? Of maybe a traumatic birth story or things like that. And so it was making sure,
Oh,
I like your word you chose, right? Is the responsibility of if you're going to help that person through it, make sure they have someone on the back end for the emotional side of it. That's not in my wheelhouse as a PT to treat. So,
well, that's very interesting. I would never have guessed that. All the things that you learn.
yeah. Yeah. Well, So, well, let's talk a little bit then. We'll switch gears here. Let's talk about who you are as a reader. So, what genres do you enjoy reading?
Oh, let me think here, because there's a lot of different genres.
Yes.
I I do like the magical realism stuff. So kind of however I can get it. I love, when it pops up in historical fiction. I, love Neil Gaiman and Good Omens. That's like one of my favorites. I love that. The magical realism is very fascinating to me, and at the same time, though, I do like learning nonfiction stuff as well. I like
Okay.
having a good balance. Like I'll often be reading one nonfiction book and then one kind of for fun book. I will say I don't have nearly as much time as I used to since I, got horses, darling dear horses. But yeah, I kind of I'll dabble in the occasional classic and poetry collection, but mainly it is magical realism.
Okay. Do you do audiobooks at all?
I love audiobooks.
Okay, because I was like, I imagine you could do some like reading hack with taking care of the horses and audiobooks at the same time to help you out there.
I, I definitely need to do that more. But then it's like if I do that, then I'll miss kind of the natural sounds of like the chickens and the
True.
horses. That's kind of cool too. So it's definitely a balance.
Yes. With my little kids, I will put on the audiobook, to do the laundry or do the sink of dishes. And I'm like, okay, you guys, like if they're entertained, right? Like obviously I make sure they're taken care of. So in the same facet. But if I was outside enjoying nature while they were doing these things,
Yes.
then it'd be a different story. So I could see where that would be different.
Mhm.
So, I guess you've kind of answered you don't have as much time to read, but I was going to ask how you fit into your busy days.
Well, I do the audiobooks. So I live way out in the country. It's like a 45-minute drive to town.
Okay.
So I'll go into town once or twice a week and I'll do the audiobooks. Normally, the audiobooks, I'll do the nonfiction stuff.
Okay.
And um, then the fiction or literary fiction or whatever, I'll do that, out here on the ranch when I have like a lazy day, maybe like once a week. It's like a really special treat, and I definitely cherish my time with just like an old school paperback book.
That sounds idyllic right there.
Yes.
Your treat of the week is some peaceful reading.
Mhm.
So, well, you have been so gracious to bring a book flight with you today as well. Can you tell us a little bit about how you chose them?
Yes, I chose one of my most favorite books of all time, which is Snow Child by Aowen Ivy. And that one, it is one of the only books that I've ever reread like probably 7 times. And it's just
Wow.
a really, really worn copy. And it's funny because it sounds like a really simple plot, but it's so not simple, like in terms of the human experience, in my opinion, anyways. And just because, it's about a middle-aged couple homesteading in Alaska, and I think like the 1920s, maybe. But it was the first time I could remember reading about a married couple that was that age. And like not only that, but they're working to like rekindle their love. And so it kind of like opened my mind to like get out of your little bubble of reading of characters about your own age, right? So
Yeah.
that was the first thing, and I found it very touching and sweet, and just her writing style, how it's just like that typical lyrical, just dripping with beautiful adjectives, and I actually listened to your Kristen Hanna interview and how
Yeah.
she said that the setting was a character, and
Yes.
I definitely thought that of Snow Child in Alaska, and that really stuck with me. And I tried to do the same thing for A Thousand Nights with
Okay.
Afghanistan. And it was like, just by the end of the book, I want these people to be in love with her as the country, right? So
Yeah.
I thought that was special. So yes.
When I read this book, exactly to your point, I thought this was going to be some simple book that I was going to blow through and like in a good way, right? Just kind of binge read it. And
Yes.
there was so much depth to this story. And it just caught, I don't think I have ever read a book like it. And I don't think since I've really ever read a book that's been as unique as that.
Yes. I know what you're saying. And it was just the littlest hint of whimsy in there. And you almost still at the end of the book, you're like, was that magic? Was it not? And that's like chef's kiss of magical realism, right?
Yeah.
But oh, she did such a good job.
Yeah, I know. I have the back to having the chills. I'm like, oh, I have the chills just thinking about that book. But I definitely could see how this, I'm not a huge rereader, but I could see how this would be a great book to reread because then you can kind of go back and you can maybe pick up different pieces of the plot sooner in the story, knowing, right, like how it
Yes.
progresses.
Yes, definitely. So I love that one. And then
Okay.
my next one is Winter Garden by, of course, Our Lady of Historical Fiction, Kristen
She
Hanna.
is.
And it's funny because I know not a lot of people like that's not their favorite Kristen Hanna. It's like always the Nightingale. But like for me, I gotta say, it's Winter Garden. And I think it was the first historical fiction that I can remember, anyways, where it was a unique perspective again, like from the Russian
Yeah.
woman's perspective, but about something we all knew already, like World War II. So I thought it was cool that it was, a different story of, in the same story basically, but also how there was that same little streak of whimsy in it with the mom character, telling these Russian fairy tales and stuff. So um, I loved that one. And it kind of was like, for me, a pairing of the lyrical writing of Snow Child and then like Kristen Hanna's, historical fiction. Like if I just could combine them, that's what I would dream for my own for my own writing style.
I love it. Just some type of make a little baby between the two.
Yes, exactly.
And have your own. I will admit, this is one of Kristen Hanna's I have not read. And it's not from lack of like not trying. It just
Yeah.
is, you know how the TBR list gets. Like it just is something else will pop up or I'll have a book club read and that I
Yes.
have to read ahead of this. And so it
Girl,
is
I know.
to read
I
her whole backlist, but I have not got to this one yet.
Yeah, and I've come across like a lot of people who were like, "Well, I wasn't like super impressed with that one." I don't know if it just caught me in the right time because you know how the books they just
Yeah.
catch you in the right time when they need to find you sometimes. And I was just like my little mind, I was like, "Wow, that was just really cool how she did that." So,
Well, and I
it
just read The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn. Have you read that one?
no, but I've heard of such good
Okay.
things.
And it was so I read a couple other of Kate Quinn's, and I feel like this was up there. So my favorite is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, but I feel like this was up there. I'm like, I'm considering that need to go back and reread The Nightingale and be like, is that still my number one book?
Oh,
But because exactly to your point, it told of a Russian sniper, like a woman sniper. So it told the other side of the World War II side that we don't often hear, right? I feel like the market is saturated with the European part of it,
yes.
but this was on that Eastern side, and it was so unique to me. And I loved her character in the book, so it was just a win.
I love that. I'm definitely checking that one out.
We should add that one because I mean, I didn't make your book flight, but I feel like that could be a good dessert pairing,
It
like
definitely would.
with the winter theme we have going on because it's Russia and it's cold.
Oh,
So
yeah, you're right. Yeah,
that
you're
could be your
catching my
dessert
breath.
pairing.
Love it.
Okay. All right. Well, what is the last book you brought for us today?
The last book is very special to me because I wrote it, and it is A Thousand Nights. The subtitle is Death's Love Letter to Afghanistan, and that
Okay.
is in reference to Death as the character, because there is a character of death in the story, and
Okay.
kind of like I was talking about, both of those writing styles did really, kind of influence me, and you just read it and you go, this is it, like this is what I like, right? This is kind of how I want to write. So It is half fairy tale and half historical fiction set in 2009. And it was the reason why I quit my military contracting job, actually, was to write this book. And it was right after NATO withdrew from Afghanistan.
Okay.
And that was, in the beginning of August. And the story was just so like heavy on my heart that I had it written in a week after I quit my job.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I was, before you added that part of it, I was thinking like, I love this story already that it was so impactful that you chose to follow your dream with it.
Yes, I did. I went all in, and I had obviously been thinking about a story to set there for a long time because, I was in and out of that country for like 13 years, and it was
Mm.
like my whole military career. And I knew a lot of Afghan people. And like, even from the first time I went over there, I was like, this place is special. It's beautiful. The people are just so like hospitable, and nobody ever sees or hears that about this country. So I
Yeah.
was like, that's what I'm going to do. But I wasn't kind of sure what else I wanted to do with it. And, yeah, with the whole withdrawal thing, it kind of like lit a fire under my butt. And it was like, you've been waiting for long enough. It felt really super relevant and important to write. Like, there's some goodness here to this country. Like, let's not all write it off. And that's what I did. Yeah, I wrote it in a week. And it's a very special place in my heart. Like, I've written many books, but it will always have a special place in my heart.
Yeah. Well, that just skyrockets. See, this is what happens. That like goes to the top of my TBR. You've intrigued me so much. I'm like, okay, yep, I got to pick that one up. And I think that is so true, right? What we see and what we watch in movies, right? Or through media or through news outlets. I think we forget that there's people in the country that are not like that, right?
Yes. Yes.
And that is when we were stationed overseas in Sicily and we went to Jerusalem, and I remember even just hearing the muezzin go off in the middle of like this busy market. It was like I
Oh,
remember thinking, because in my mind, right, I've watched these movies about the war and that, it's just all bad, right? Quote, it's all bad. And I remember being like, I had this moment of like, am I okay? Like, what's going on? I'm in the middle of a busy market. I've got my little kids. Like, is this? And
yes.
and then just like, okay, yeah, being like, no, not all these people are, it's not all bad. It's just
It's
that's what has been
very,
portrayed to us.
yes, very understandable that you felt that way because that is all that we see.
Yeah.
And like, it's good that you were able to talk yourself down from it, and good that you travel to those places to see that firsthand. And, not a lot of people get to do that or choose to do it. So
Yeah.
I commend you for that. And I always loved the call to prayer. And I always knew like I was so different from my coworkers, who, of course, were mostly men, right? These like certain type of military dudes, and
Yeah.
the call to prayer would go off multiple times a day or on base, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I love it, it's so beautiful. And of course most of them would be like, oh, grumble grumble, so annoying, like waking us up.
Yeah.
Like, I think I'm seeing things differently than how you're seeing things.
Yeah. And I think that everything can be contorted, right, by extremists to be a bad thing, right? And it's not just talking about I mean, obviously their religion is a big part of it, but like everything can be, even in America, right? Like you can have extremism and it can be people taking it to the end. And it doesn't mean that that group of people all are that, are extremist.
Absolutely. You are correct. And that is what I was hoping people would, come away from this story. And even though it's set there, like it's not a heavy story. I don't write super heavy stories, even though the topics are heavy. I make them hopeful and like loving and beautiful on purpose. And yeah, it's actually like a very quick read as well. So if you check
Okay.
it out, you'll have to let me know what you think.
All right, listeners. So go grab 1,000 Nights after you hear this and get to it, and let's let Eli know about it. You can message her. Actually, this would be a great time. Why don't you tell us where we could find you?
Yes. So mainly I'm on the Instagrams,
Okay.
and probably find me either by just typing in Eli Gardner, or Abracadabra Inc. That's the
Okay.
name of what I publish my books under.
Okay. Perfect. Well, I will also include those links in our show notes as well. So listeners, you can go follow her over there. You can see the beautiful horses. You can hear all about her. Are you, I didn't ask you, are you writing now?
I am sort of. I will write forever because my brain will not ever stop like coming up with ideas.
Okay.
I just released one in February, and I try and take like a month or two off and just kind of, allow myself to like reset and like
Yeah.
veg. And I've been kind of getting that itch though, like, okay, I can feel it's time. I've already started like planning out the next one. So I'll probably hit that pretty hard. Like in the next month or two, I like to write in really manic like spurts, like the week-long sessions and stuff. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping to get the next one out around August.
Awesome. Okay. Well, this might be perfect timing with our episode, right? We could make sure to
Oh,
include that
yes.
when it releases. So,
Perfect.
well, keep me posted on that. How I love to end our show is with our bonus pairings. So, this is a speed round of questions you can answer really quick. Are you a rereader?
Yes.
Okay. All right. What is one book you've read that has changed your life?
The Alchemist.
Oh, that's a good one.
Mhm.
Okay. Where is your favorite place to read?
Oh, in the chicken coop.
I love it. All right. And then lastly, what are you reading next?
It's probably not going to sound very exciting, but it's called You Can Farm by Joel Salatin.
Ooh,
Yes.
he is someone I'm like, he'd be so fun to have on the show.
Yeah, he would be.
He's just such a unique character, for sure.
Absolutely.
So, well, wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know your time is precious, and I appreciate all you've given me.
Yes, thank you so much, Kara. It was fun chatting with you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Eli Gardner and her book flight of historical fiction books with a touch of magical realism. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information about today's book flight or other books that we talked about. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.